I want to talk about a theme that's not explicitly thought, rather taught in the Buddhist tradition, but it's an idea that could clarify a lot of things for a lot of us. It's derived more from the Diamond Heart training, which is a different tradition. And that's the idea of the Buddhist ego, or the working ego as they call it. I'll start by talking about the metaphor of the lotus growing from the mud. It's a typical Buddhist symbol. It represents the purity of Dharma growing from the mud of samsara, the confusion of samsara, and obviously implies a discontinuity from impurity, so to speak, or confusion, to purity, or clear mind. So how does this take place? A lot of beginners, a lot of us, a long time into the practice, become sort of paranoid about the ego, about our ego. How can somebody who is confused, who is mired in perhaps ego, how can a person transcend that and reach, so to speak, the other shore, as a metaphor again of nirvana says? Well, here's a concept that in fact we don't abandon ego suddenly. There's a gap between nirvana and samsara, but initially, of course, we function on the worldly ego, and again, we'll derive a concept from the Sufi tradition that we have a series of selves, each of which becomes subtler and subtler. In Buddhism, we speak of the path. It's almost like the focus is more on the external, the path, and then there's 9 jhanas, sometimes 9 vehicles that are subtler and subtler and subtler, but it's the same, really the same thing. You looked at it from the point of view of the practitioner, or the point of view of the path. So in this idea, we start, of course, with a confused worldly ego, run by our desires. Of course, some people are more civilized than others, and so on. But the difference is only relative. It's still based on personality. So at some point, we encounter the Dharma and become convinced logically, rationally, that the teachings are the path to follow to end suffering. Well, who decides to follow the path? The ego. The ego is the part of us that achieves, that wants to possess, that wants to get away from pain and suffering. So what else do we have to use but the ego to enter the path? So in that sense, not be afraid of that. Do not be afraid of the desire to have a goal being enlightenment. So we begin to develop, again, what we would call a Buddhist ego, or working ego. And here what we do is we purify the heaviness of the personality through various practices called relative practices, loving kindness, tonglen, meditation. These are called relative because they work on the obscurations, on the blockages to our Buddha nature. Now, our Buddha nature is within each one of us. It's pre-existing, but it's blocked by our ignorance. So it's not a matter of creating a Buddha nature or developing a Buddha nature with good actions, with purification, but rather removing. It's like the sun is there, but the clouds are there. So the relative practice remove the clouds until the sun can shine through. In the same way, the emptiness that's realized through purification is the emptiness of the clear light of the mind of wisdom, which is what's ultimately real, while the obscurations in samsara is really not real. So in that sense, relative practices are not designed. Do not think that you practice to become a perfect person or a saint. There is no end to purifying the personality, because basically the personality is ego. But there is a gap between personality and enlightened mind. And as the personality becomes purified, we become capable, through the aid of a master, through our devotion, to finally receive that recognition of the nature of mind. And at that point there's like a jump, a leap. Whereas now we meet the Buddha qualities in an absolute sense. There's no effort to be done. They radiate. And of course we enter the higher practice of Mahamudra or Dzogchen. So the ego goes a long way with us, just becomes subtler and subtler. And again, be aware that the path is not a practice of making yourself perfect or making your personality perfect, but of basically purifying your obstacles to your already present primordial enlightened mind. And that's basically my point. The working ego is what we have to work with, and it's just become subtler and subtler until it's no longer a barrier. The personality no longer blocks the shining through of the wisdom mind. That's that simple, but again, it's not a concept that often comes up in Buddhism, so I thought it would be helpful to think of traveling the path that way, and of the distinction between relative and absolute bodhicitta, wisdom mind. So, good luck.